Welcome to Brainish English Stories.
Chapter 2. Marriage, Property, Birth, and Death. The Count continued to be friendly with Victorine and Teresa, and by the time Sir Mark returned from England, he was dismayed to find out that his daughter had secretly married the worthless Count. He said nothing, but his health became poor from that moment, and he soon looked like an old gray-haired man. Because Teresa had married him under French law, the Count was able to take all the money that she had inherited from her mother. This made Sir Mark hate France, and he promised that he would never return there. He told his daughter that she was welcome to come and visit him at Crowley Castle, but that her husband must never come with her, for the Count was not welcome under his roof. Sir Mark was also angry with Duke for a few months, because he believed that if Duke had returned to Paris in time, Teresa would not have married the Count. Duke did eventually go to Paris, but by then Sir Mark had left. Duke heard that many French people felt sorry for the poor English lady that had married the worthless Count, who was spending all her money at the gambling tables. He visited Teresa, who told him she was waiting for her husband to return and take her out. However, the Count did not return, and Duke saw how much this disappointed Teresa. They talked politely for a while, and then Duke left without meeting the Count. He wanted to visit them again and say goodbye before he left for England, but they did not answer his letters, and in the end he returned to England without seeing them. He did not tell Sir Mark any of this because he knew that it would only make him more miserable. He helped his uncle by working on the property and visiting the tenants, and he was glad that he could in this way repay the kindness that Sir Mark had always showed him. Duke was busy, but after a while he found that life in the castle with only Sir Mark as a companion was not as exciting as traveling around Europe, and he was bored. Sometimes he went to visit Mr. Hawtrey in the parsonage, and there, of course, he met Bessie again. Mrs. Hawtrey thought it was a wonderful opportunity for Bessie to meet a rich man, and perhaps even marry him. Although she knew about Teresa's unfortunate marriage and how disappointed Sir Mark and Duke were about it, she could see no reason why Duke should remain unmarried for the rest of his life. She thought Bessie would be as good a wife as any other, and made sure that Bessie and Duke saw each other frequently. Gradually, Duke's heart was won by the simple country charms of the parson's daughter. She had loved him for as long as she had known him, simply and purely. A little over a year after Duke's return from Europe, he decided that no girl, apart from perhaps the lost Teresa, could make him happier than Bessie, and asked her to marry him. Meanwhile, very little was heard about Teresa. She wrote letters to Sir Mark, who always sighed and moaned over them, but would not tell anybody what she had written. However, even he could not imagine how miserable she had become. Love had gone out the window long before poverty came in the door. The Count quickly spent all of Teresa's money, as Sir Mark had known he would, and then began to steal her jewels and gamble with them. One evening, she went into her room and found that the diamonds in a frame around a picture of her mother had been taken, and the picture ruined. She sat and wept, crying out for her mother and father and all the good things she had lost in her foolish marriage. Victorine found her in her room, sitting on the floor in tears, and she knew what had happened. From that time she began to watch the Count as a tiger watches its prey. Then letters came from Bessie and Sir Mark, bringing news of the coming marriage, and Teresa was dismayed. Victorine was only angry. He should not marry that poor country girl, no matter how pleasant she is. If he really loved you, he should have waited. The Count will not live forever. Teresa could not see Victorine's face when she said this, and how evil it looked. A year went by, and Teresa became more and more miserable, while Duke and Bessie were married and had a little girl. Not long after the baby's birth, Bessie's father died, which meant that Mrs. Hawtrey had to leave the parsonage and find another place to live. Fortunately, the new parson was a bachelor, and he allowed Mrs. Hawtrey to stay in the parsonage as a housekeeper. Bessie wanted her mother to live at the castle, but Sir Mark would not allow it because, although he liked Bessie, he did not like her mother, and blamed her for the marriage. He longed to see Teresa again, and could not help thinking that Bessie was a poor substitute for his beautiful and passionate daughter. In France, Teresa cried almost every night, although during the day she pretended to be content. She imagined that Bessie and Duke were living happily with Sir Mark, and that he never thought about her at all, but busied himself with his new granddaughter. Then one day, when the Count had lost even more money, she said something to him which made him very angry, and he punched her. She stood in front of him, white and shaking. The Count laughed at her and left the room. Teresa called Victorine and asked her to bring the other servants to the room. She wanted to show them her bruises, so that they could be witnesses when she took her revenge. However, Victorine didn't call the other servants, but gave Teresa some medicine which made her sleepy. When she fell asleep, Victorine looked at her bruises for a long time with an evil smile on her face. She returned to her medicine cupboard and mixed another medicine, but she did not give it to Teresa. She kept it in the cupboard, waiting for an opportunity to give it to the Count. It was a very long night, but Victorine sat with Teresa and watched her sleep until morning. Then she heard a noise downstairs, and going out to see what it was, found two servants carrying the Count into the house. He was dead. He had been killed in a sword fight, and when Victorine saw his dead body, she punched it. "That is what you did to my darling," she cried. She went to the cupboard, took out the medicine she had made, and poured it onto the wooden floor.